meeting for the Village of Tinley Park Plan Commission to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Secretary, please take roll.
Engel,
Here.
Manny, Gatto,
Here.
Gray,
Here.
Aitchison, Vic, Stanton.
Here. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the minutes from the April, I'm sorry, I skipped over communications. Staff, are there any communications?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. Approval of minutes, may I have a motion to approve the minutes for the April 4th, 2019 meeting?
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner
Great.
Gray. And seconded by Commissioner Engel. All right. Okay, all those in favor of approving the April 4th, 2019 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right. The first item on the agenda this evening is a public hearing for the text amendment to the zoning code addressing telecommunications service and small cell wireless facilities. May I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Engel, second.
Second.
Commissioner Gatto, or Commissioner
Gray.
Gray. All right. Okay, I have confirmation that all the notices were made for the public hearing. Staff, please make your presentation.
Yeah, so this is the public hearing. We previously talked on April 4th. We did the workshop for this and talked in pretty good detail, kind of about what you guys thought was appropriate in terms of some of the changes we were making. So we've made a couple adjustments based on that feedback and as well as based on our attorney's feedback on a couple situations. I'll just quickly go through the background and stuff again. We went into a little more detail in the workshop, but again, if you guys have any questions, let me know. But just since this is the public hearing, I'll do a little bit of background. So, but we're describing these kind of as telecommunication service facilities. That's kind of a catch-all for all of your wireless antennas, the equipment, the boxes, and everything else associated with them. The primary part of these is regulating kind of the aesthetics of them, not really the use, the function, or the environmental side of it. It's kind of hard since the technology is always changing, so this is kind of the third or fourth time in the village's history we've updated this. These were originally adopted in 1998, and then kind of the last update was 2010. So kind of the biggest thing overarching with a lot of this is the Telecommunications Act 1996. That kind of limited the role that municipalities can have just regulating them. And it primarily relates to aesthetics and then requiring that, you can't really prohibit them in a sense. You can kind of create some hierarchies and things like that in terms of your normal cell phone towers. There's also the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which also has a number of rules and kind of regulations in place as well. So staff originally kind of drafted these to update them, kind of make them a little more clear, give them a little more teeth and clarity for staff as well as cell phone carriers when they want to put these in. So those were drafted in December 2017. They were pretty much ready to go to village board. They went through plan commission, ZBA, I think, and then the committees. So they were pretty much ready for adoption. And then along came kind of the state bill, which was Senate Bill 1451, which they introduced at the time that basically was proposing to do some extra requirements on small cell antennas. So we kind of held off on adoption of this, saying that a good portion of what we were proposing to do was small cell updates, being kind of the newest technology that's come in the last 10 years. And that was signed into law in April 2018, and that basically required that small cell co-locations basically have to be permitted by right on utility poles and a public right-of-way. So it preempted quite a bit of location-wise in our village right-of-ways and on our poles. It also set quite a bit of limits in terms of permitting costs, annual rent, review times, approval times. Made it, basically set a lot of that stuff that we couldn't really regulate. So we did adopt kind of a text amendment soon after that, just to make sure we can regulate them to the greatest extent possible within our rights of way. So in terms of that rent and requiring a permit and all that was adopted for small cell antennas within our right of way. What we're kind of doing here now is kind of going the next step. This adds some design standards that will apply to those antennas within our right of way, as well as if on private property someone wanted to do a small cell antenna. Basically making these kind of uniform in design and the requirements and how they'll look throughout the village, so. So the main changes in this update from what was presented in 2017, again, those small cell locations and the design requirements that kind of fit within the state's law. It requires disguising kind of larger new poles and antennas if they're within 1,000 feet of a zoning district. It also kind of creates some consistency in the wording and then reorganizes those antennas kind of into a clear hierarchy of, okay, here's where you should first put your pole. If you can't do that, here's the next step, and on from that. So on your screen now and on the slide is kind of our proposed hierarchy. We went through this at the workshop. With the one major recommendation we had with this was we originally had kind of just grouped the business and the residential together, so we kind of broke those out again. One more step just to make it clear, with any locations in the legacy district kind of being the last place we want to see them around our downtown, is kind of where the last place you want to see a big antenna or a big pole. Here's just kind of some examples, kind of a pole, your standard monopole, a disguised flag and a disguised pine tree, which those can come into play again if they're in residential areas. If they get down to that point where that's the only place they can go, they'll be required to be disguised. The one downside to those is you usually can't co-locate on them, so you can really only do one antenna, at least in the flagpole. The pine tree you can make a couple fit in there, but sometimes those stick out just as much as the monopole. So here's some examples of just some co-location. So a monopole with multiple antennas, co-locating on a building, and that we kind of showed that building in that image as an example of one thing we had changed in this code. No one really liked that, the antennas being over the roof, and they kind of stand out. There's a lot of antennas on a lot of roofs that you can't see or don't notice unless you know they're there. So our new code update will require those to be below the parapet and then blend into the building. So, but that is an example of at least co-locating at a taller building and how those can be utilized. As well, we talked about that basically they wouldn't be allowed on the front facade of buildings by right. They could come in for a variation, but they would just be allowed on the sides and the back of buildings. And that applies for cell phone towers as well as small cell antennas. If they're on private property, they can put those on a building, but it would have to be on the sides and the rear of the building. And then water tower co-location as well. So kind of big, ugly towers anyways that people are used to, and we kind of like to, if you can put them on there, they usually don't stand out quite as much. So. Then we have the small cell antennas, which there's a couple different designs and ways to make them stealth, different coverings and requirements. So we're gonna keep those pretty consistent by our design standards. We can kind of pick the design. That it's typically just a couple small boxes attached to the pole and then some kind of covering that kind of covers the antenna that usually goes then above the pole. Those are limited to basically going no more than 10 feet, I believe, or 7 feet above the existing pole. So that the state law kind of required that, and we're keeping that consistent with the state law, with basically limiting the height as much as possible. Then there's also co-locations on kind of utility poles, more ComEd poles, which the majority we've seen coming through us are going on ComEd poles. It's kind of the obvious route for them. They're usually ugly poles already, so no one's gonna complain. And then two, their electric is literally sitting right under it. So those seem to be the most common ones that they're doing. But there is still some interest in light poles, especially to get into more residential areas and kind of boost their coverage. That seems to be basically the next step that they're looking into. There's a couple examples of how those small cell antennas are placed on different utility poles. The kind of last part that this code update will address are distributed antenna systems or DAS systems. That kind of are cell phone repeaters, but there's usually a kind of a master cell phone tower somewhere, and then it kind of repeats through a building. The most commonly used one in the village, I believe the amphitheater has those. And then, so that, one company will usually own that DAS system and then, lease out components to different carriers to get in there. And for bigger buildings or highly populated areas, that's fairly important to be able to get cell phone signals. So especially at the amphitheater, I know it's been useful. I went from having no cell phone signal and you can't get a hold of anyone, and now you can kind of get some cell phone signal. And I think they have Wi-Fi and stuff built in there as well. So, and when done right, you can, again, just like a cell phone antenna or a small cell antenna, tie it in with the building and the aesthetics. So we went over kind of some general considerations or questions we had at the workshop. We had originally talked about, for new cell phone towers, which aren't very common these days. Most of Tinley is probably built out in terms of the poles and then kind of the big antennas, but just since they may be replaced at some point in the future, they might be moved, or you might get a new carrier up. This kind of covers that, and basically asking where do you draw the line in terms of a special use. So one recommendation we had from you guys was just to continue holding the line in terms of requiring a special use for any new tower. So they're allowed to co-locate on existing locations and on buildings, but if they're doing a new tower, even if that means we probably can't say no in some situations, that at least, we'll make that clear as staff, but at least that allows some notice to surrounding property owners, residents or businesses, just to let them know, so one day there's not a new giant tower going up next to them and they kind of know why. So we also kind of went over that hierarchy, and again, the one recommendation was kind of splitting up the residential and the business and the one not being grouped together, putting the business areas before the residential, which was good. The masonry requirements we talked about, and it was kind of believed that the consensus was leaving it as a masonry requirement. If for some reason that's not practical, again, we have a variation option. So we kind of saw that especially around residential areas where we have a masonry requirement right now for, the majority of homes, I believe, built since 1970, or the whole first floor is masonry. So kind of making sure we carry that to these, even though they're smaller structures, kind of fit in with that design that we have going through the village. Again, we talked about the location on buildings, allowing them on the side and the rear, but then limiting them in the front. And again, if there's some reason why they have to, they do have an option to come here before you guys. And then the small cell decorative light poles, I kind of originally drafted this trying to make it as strict as I can. That's the absolute last place we want to see small cell antennas. However, kind of reviewing what I wrote, it turns out it was a little too strict. We can't prohibit them, and we actually can't even show preference to utility poles. So I loosened up my language, but just with our attorney's advice, we made it basically as strict as we can to say it's not preferred, but they can go on there. They'd have to replace it with the exact same pole that's there to our exact specifications of the poles, which would likely, most of those don't have the structural integrity to support any of this anyways. So they would basically have to custom build a pole to go in there that matches all of our poles. So it could be done, but it's probably unlikely, and we can probably find them a better situation. But again, we had to change that language just to make sure it met the state law requirements. So that's it for the staff report, and I think going over what we changed, what the intent of this is. So
Great.
back to you guys.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, anyone on the commission have any more comments or discussion points?
No.
None?
No? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience? I don't think so. All right. All right, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner-
Second.
Commissioner Gatto, and, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gray, and then seconded by Commissioner Gatto. Okay, may I have a request a motion from the planning commission?
Sure, I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the village board approve text amendments to section 2 and section 3.w of the zoning ordinance related to regulations for telecommunications service facilities, including but not limited to regulations for new freestanding cell towers, co-locations, small cell, and distributed antenna systems, as indicated in staff's draft text amendments dated 4/11/2019.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Engel, seconded by Commissioner Gatto. A roll call?
Gray,
Yes.
Gatto,
Yes.
Engel,
Yes?
Stanton.
Yes. Okay, good of the order?
Let's see, just some quick updates. North Street construction started. I think obviously most of you guys have probably seen that. They've also kind of hammered out some of the pavers that they're gonna put out there, the color and the design, as well as kind of the design of some of the crosswalks and some of that they're gonna be doing. We're also working on the streetscape plan and getting that approved, so that way, not just with North Street, but with the whole downtown, we potentially have 2 or 3 big developments happening here that basically any of those improvements will all tie together, in terms of the style and the type of brick used, the type of landscaping put in there. So staff's been working on that. They also did a proactive code enforcement kind of plan that they passed recently, I believe, just to kind of work with an outside firm that's kind of going to be tracking foreclosures, as well as kind of have a plan to how to address some issues that we consistently have with foreclosures. So I believe that's going forward as well. And I believe that's it. I was gonna say, our new trustee Mueller's here in the crowd. We've kind of been talking to him, especially today, I think, given, talking about kind of some of our priorities, what we're planning on doing, prioritizing the downtown development, and some economic development, and overall building code enforcement initiatives that we have. So he was here today, kind of walking through with our different staff members, getting the hang of everything. That's it for us.
Okay, thank you. And trustee Mueller, congratulations. Thank you. All right, looking forward to working with you. Okay. No one from the public? I would think there is no comments there. May I have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Commissioner Engel, second.
Second.
Commissioner Gatto. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.